All right, everybody, I'll be back with you in just a couple of seconds. I'm going to check on one thing before we get started. Okay. All right, so somebody's here already. Well, welcome. Let's see what we're going to do here. I thought what might be interesting is to take a look at Soviet setup, and by going through that, we can see what the victory conditions are on each map section, and then we can have a quick look and understand a little bit more about why units are where they are and what may or may not happen, and kind of pontificate about how the game might play, because it's always cool to kind of anticipate what the game might be like and then actually play it and realize you were completely freaking wrong. So here we go. Let's start up in the northwest side of the map, so it'll be Europe over here, and we've got here's Czechoslovakia, Romania, Austria, and then map edge. This is Western Germany, Hanover, etc. And we've got the German army, the Soviet forces arrayed behind the border. And the idea would be, welcome there, guys. Please let me know who's joined. I can't see. Here's Poland. And what I've done is set up back from the border, generally speaking, and I'll explain why that is in just a second. And then put a couple of army groups back that can respond to potential attacks and things like that. So the victory conditions for the U.S. For them to capture 40 urban centers, i.e. these things, city hexes basically, and have less than 40 Soviet units on the map. And that doesn't, when they say units, they don't make a distinction between air and ground that I know of. So that's a pretty substantial whack of things we have to kill. Knowing that basically what you can see here is what the Soviets start with, and what they will never have any more units than this. In this 1998 scenario, you don't receive turn-by-turn reinforcements. You don't. Same for the Americans over here, and in fact, the Americans don't receive any of those mega divisions that you might normally see. So if everyone's got a typical division, will be a 10 attack, 9 defense. There are these mega, third mechanized and second armored or whatever have 14, 10, and stuff like that. None of those are in the game. These are amongst some of the toughest units. 775 mech. There's some armored dudes here. 865s. There is not a lot of big ball-busting U.S. units, if I could use that expression. So 40 hexes, 40 urban hexes in this map and the map behind the camera. And the air conditioner just went off, so I can turn the volume down on my voice. And we also have to have less than 40 units on not just this map, but also this map, right? Now, we've got the Turkish forces here that we can bring into play. We've got the Iranians in play, and Iran. And it's considered that Iran and Iraq are a consolidated country now, due to the Iran-Iraq war resolving with an Iranian win with US support, which I find rather interesting. And what's also kind of quirky is that the Israelis are allied with the Iranians. I don't know that I'm going to use the Israeli forces. For a start, they're totally disproportionately powerful with these 10-10 units. In today's world, with our modern view, we know that would never happen. Maybe we'll just have them on the map and they can't attack or something like that. I don't know what we'll do with those guys. So we'll have to work that out. So on this side of the map, on these two maps here, you've got all these little white blocks, and those white blocks represent, that one doesn't represent anything, refineries, and that's going to be important for the Soviets to track combat supply and, movement supply, and then combat supply is something different. It's back to an urban hex or whatever the case may be. So we've got this situation here where the consolidated European forces, which does not include British forces that I can tell, there are no British units on the map. So one Canadian force and then the Americans, they're coming in this way. And as the Soviet player, what I'm setting up here, what I've done is looked at really the avenues of approach for these guys. There's only two, along this corridor here, and along this corridor here. And the reason why is that the Americans and the Allies have to trace supply by road or rail back to a map edge. Yeah. Now, all of these hexes here are considered to have roads in them. They just didn't want to make the map ugly. So they're all interconnecting roads. That's fine. But once you start looking at the map, and once you get across the border, basically, you're going to have to use this rail line towards Moscow, or this rail line towards Moscow to keep it open and keep in supply. Now, interestingly enough, in 1998, in the future war, we have the capacity to do amphibious landings, but only on the far two maps on the right-hand side of the screen. So there's really no worthwhile amphibious landing opportunities, perhaps unless we do something down in on the far eastern front near Vladivostok, and there are no real opportunities for airborne landings because the air interception rules are pretty hefty, and I'm not sure, based on my rough reading of it so far, that US forces could drop anywhere significantly and survive, or actually get to the landing stage and survive. So for this future view conflict where there's an optional rule for space marines that can drop from orbit, we can't manage air operations or marine-based nautical land invasions, invasions over here, for instance. So I can't use the Baltic Sea. I could use hovercraft. There are hovercraft in the game, and there are actually divisions of hovercraft. And I think this was kind of some far-flung thinking of the game. So they're relatively powerful, but the US doesn't really have very many of them, and those that they have are all over in Alaska. So what's going to end up happening over in that far corner is a lot of those forces are going to transfer over here, and then we'll see some activity on the Baltic Sea because I can transfer in Norway, land here, and get behind the Soviet forces. But it's going to take a turn or two for those transfers to happen and for them to stage. So the Soviets have taken that into consideration. They're set up here. They've put a very thin defense in the center and a very deep defense in on the two flanks. These are all 2 divisions strong here, at least, and they're all behind rivers, which will halve the attacker, or they're in cities, which will double the defender. So that's kind of what's going on over there. For those that have just joined, if you wouldn't mind just saying hi, dropping a comment in so I can see who's joined. I can only see 4 or 5, maybe 6 people. There we go. So if you can just let me know who's here, and we can keep going. So there's that side of the board. Now down here on this is the southwestern map. There's obviously the threat of the Iranian US forces coming in this way from northern Iran. Afghanistan is off, out of bounds for everybody. And the Chinese border starts here and here. And the Chinese, Chicoms are going to be attacking the Soviets from this direction and then on the other map. And we'll talk about that in just a second. But over here, we've got a fairly sparse defense. And that's primarily because the Soviet supply situation is, the the Chinese supply situation is they have to trace to a urban center with a rail hex. There are no urban centers or rail hexes here, so any initial attacks are going to be done out of supply, and they would need to capture one of these hexes here to put themselves into supply. That's my reading of the rules at the moment anyway. Kind of funky. There is one urban center here, but there is no rail to it. Now, maybe they can count 5 hexes to that and do it, but they're still not going to be able to be in full supply to attack. So, and I just saw somewhere where they could potentially lunge and attack in here. So I've missed a gap. So I may, as I'm setting up, I may take this response force and move it down here or something like that. I need to make a note of that. We'll put these blocks here, trying to remember it. Okay, so in Objective Moscow, the supply rules are different for each faction. There are 3 factions: the Chikoms, the Russians, and the Allies, the US allied forces. And they all have their various victory conditions. So I've told you about the American victory conditions, which is predicated on activity on these 2 maps that we're looking at currently. And then let's go now to the other side of the map over here. This section here where we're playing the screening waiting game. Here I've basically got a couple of extra Soviet armies set up and staged so that they can rush up this way or rush down this way or be taken off somewhere else. In the center, you can see there's not much. Over here, I really haven't put any forces down. This is the northeastern force pool, and they're supposed to protect all of this. And my view is that first of all, there are no victory conditions here. Secondly, there are very few ports, and any ports that could be used can only be used by probably the Americans to fuel, feed, and make combat ready their units. And it's 5 units, I believe, per port, whether it's a major or a minor port. I think it's 5 and 3 is the deal, or 5 and 2. And these ports are so isolated that there's nothing that they could get to do anything. So nothing's going to happen here. So what's going to end up happening is all of these guys are going to move this way to support whatever's going to happen with the Chinese, the activities that will go along with the Chinese. And the Chinese have a slightly easier time of it because they have much less dense terrain to cover, but their supply situation is more complex. So the Chinese victory conditions are to capture these red squares. They are urban centers. They need to capture all of the urban centers on the 2 maps in Russia, and there need to be no more than 6 units left on the board of the Soviets. That's a pretty tall order. Now keep in mind, there are no reinforcements, but there are replacements, and it's a fixed amount of replacements every turn. So it is conceivable that depending on where reinforcements came in, all that sort of good stuff, that you could get down to that level if things went your way. So you can imagine all of these tier 2, tier 4. There's a bunch of hovercraft units that I've discussed just previously. So if you've joined just a little while ago, you're just going to have to rewind a little and listen a bit to the hovercraft story. Basically, they don't pay. I actually told people they were in the game. I didn't tell you what they were good for. They have a typical 3 attack, 3 defense, but 7 movement rating. I'll have to do this for you. So pretty standard, but they only pay 1 movement point to move. They don't. They're not stopped by zones of control, but they cannot enter rough, broken, or urban terrain. Now, don't ask me why they can go through forest and woods. but it is what it is. So these guys here are basically not terribly useful for much. I'm going to try and get them to a place where I can rail them somewhere of use. And I don't even know if I can do that. Because I'm just looking here I'm not even allowed to move along a road through rough. So we may have to meander our way, hoof it to a location where we can get onto some sort of transportation network. Blue lines are rail. Dotted blue lines are secondary rail, which is important when we look at supply. So when I looked at this section of the map, despite the fact that there's all of these Chinese units, 93 crappy infantry divisions and about a dozen mechanized divisions, I think there's an opportunity for the Soviets to make the game pretty hard for the Chinese by being aggressive in turn one. And by that I mean the Chinese are going to move first anyway, so they'll have their opportunity to attack. But I've created these armies of, so tier 1, all tier category 1 units, 3 mechanized and 1 armored unit in these catty corner. See the way these guys are rotated? They're all my offensive armies, and I've also got the cruise missile units with them. And they will 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 armies will, once the Chinese have had their turn, their intention is to plunge into China and capture as many urban areas as they can, cut supply, make life very difficult for the Chinese. Hopefully we can beat the Chinese up so badly that I can then free up units and use this rail network, which I think will basically get me all the way across the map, and then I can start funneling units over to fight on the western side of the map. So that's kind of my plan. That's the victory conditions. I've got the Soviets are basically set up. I haven't laid out all of the air where it's going to go, but most of it is out, and it's all the Soviets are clipped. And now we're going to look at setting up the clipping the Chinese, which has a bunch of them, unfortunately. We'll clip the Chinese. They own and control North and South Korea. There are these 3 Vietnamese divisions. I don't know where they're supposed to go. I'm just going to put them on the border down here somewhere, and we'll move them in. There are a bunch of Japanese units who, because of the rules, I'm not sure how they would move onto the mainland here to do anything substantial. I've also got some US Marine units, etc. They can make amphibious landings, but the fact of the matter is, if we're playing this as a 3-player game, the US, while they care that the Soviets are destroyed so that units don't toddle off across the map, they are not necessarily that excited about trying to help the Chinese win their war per se. So, they can be here if things go wrong, but I fully intend to transfer as much of the US force as I can west. And I'm going to do the same thing with the hovercraft units here set up in Alaska. They'll also head west, and we'll kind of go at it from there. So I think everything is going to boil down to fighting on this map and fighting on those 2 distant maps in the far perspective there. So if I can, I'll actually pull this map up once I get all these units off of here. I don't know that it's going to be very useful except for the charts that are on it, and they're all upside down because of the way I've got the maps oriented, because I thought I was being clever and making space for myself, but I wasn't. I created a turn track over here on the left-hand side, 26 turn track. There's no turn track on the game map or in the game. And I think that is it. There's a few anomalies. Well, I shouldn't say anomalies. A few things I'm a little unclear on. I really do want to make sure that there is no means of doing naval invasions of any type other than what I have with the Marines. And only the US can do those. That means I could only move these Japanese forces once I captured a port. And once again, I have no incentive to capture a port here. But I'm wondering if it's not worthwhile, since I have nothing to lose with the Japanese, transferring some of these Japanese units into the Western Theatre, for instance. There's absolutely no reason why I couldn't do that. I would, do the right thing and not be too gamey and leave some units behind to garrison the country. But I think that's a swag of extra units that we may well need in the future. So we're going to keep that in mind. And we're going to play the game the way the rules are written, and we'll see how it works. And we'll try not to, we will game the system wherever we can, of course, because I'm playing solo. Okay, I think that's about it. I just wanted to check in with you guys, let you know that we're still cranking away on this thing. If anyone had questions or comments, feel free to post them up. I'm not seeing any comments, so I guess that is either good or bad, as the case may be. I've had some issues with streaming on YouTube lately. So, Objective Moscow, we're 50% set up, probably 40% clipped. I'm going to get stuck into these Chinese guys next and set them up. And we will talk to you guys all soon. I hope you enjoyed the vid and look